You know about dinosaurs. Everyone does. The T-Rex, the Brachiosaurus, the asteroid that ended it all. But here is what nobody tells you. Before any of that, before the first dinosaur ever drew a breath, the Earth went through something so catastrophic, so alien, so completely unlike anything you have ever imagined that the dinosaurs themselves were only possible because of it. By the end of this video, you will know what creatures ruled the Earth before dinosaurs existed. You will know about a mass extinction so severe that 96% of all life on the planet was erased, and you will understand how a world covered in poison, fire, and acid somehow gave birth to everything that came after, including you. Stick with it. The story gets strange fast. Let's go back, way back, not millions of years, hundreds of millions. The year is roughly 540 million years ago. Paleontologists call this the Cambrian period, and your first instinct might be to picture a dead planet, barren rock, empty skies, silence. But you would be wrong. The oceans were already exploding with life. Biologist Stephen Jay Gould spent years studying this era and described what happens next as the most creative moment in the history of animal life on Earth. In less than 25 million years, a blink in geological time, nearly every major body plan that would ever exist on Earth appeared for the first time. Eyes, legs, shells, jaws. Things with 5 eyes and a single claw. Things that looked like modern shrimp but were the apex predators of their world. Things that had no name and left no descendants. Your body, the basic blueprint of it, was sketched out during this period. But none of these creatures lived on land. The land was still empty, completely. No plants, no insects, no sound. Just rock and wind and ultraviolet radiation pouring down from a sky with no ozone layer to block it. Then, around 470 million years ago, plants made the crossing. They were simple, barely more than green mats clinging to wet rock near the shoreline. But they changed everything. They began converting carbon dioxide into oxygen at a scale the planet had never seen. Geologist Robert Berner spent decades modeling this process and found that atmospheric oxygen levels surged dramatically during this period, eventually reaching levels higher than today. More oxygen meant something could breathe on land, and so something did. The first animals to leave the ocean permanently were not fish. They were arthropods, ancient relatives of modern scorpions and millipedes. Imagine a millipede the length of your forearm, navigating a landscape of nothing. No trees, just low ferns and mosses. No other animals, no predators. Just endless green mats and open sky. For tens of millions of years, giant arthropods ruled the land. Millipedes 8 feet long, dragonflies with wingspans wider than a crow's, scorpions large enough to eat small vertebrates. Then fish learned to breathe. This sounds absurd, but it happened. Around 375 million years ago, a creature paleontologist Neil Shubin famously called Tiktaalik emerged in the fossil record. It was a fish, but it had a neck. It had primitive limbs instead of fins. It could do push-ups. Shubin's team found the fossil in the Canadian Arctic after years of searching, and it rewrote the story of how your own body came to be. Your arms, your hands, the way your head turns independently of your shoulders, all of it traces back to creatures like Tiktaalik, pulling themselves out of shallow water into a world that had never seen anything like them. These early 4-limbed creatures, called tetrapods, spread rapidly. They evolved into amphibians, then into reptiles. The reptiles figured out how to lay eggs on dry land without the eggs drying out. This was revolutionary. It meant life was no longer tethered to water. The world was lush by now. Enormous forests of tree-sized ferns and towering primitive trees blanketed the continents. Oxygen was so high that fires burned constantly. Coal was being created in enormous quantities, the same coal your civilization would one day dig up and burn. Scientists call this the Carboniferous period, named directly for the carbon it buried. And then everything died. Not because of an asteroid, not because of a predator, because of volcanoes. Around 252 million years ago, a volcanic event in what is now Siberia began releasing lava on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Geologist Paul Wignall has called what followed the most profound biological crisis in the history of complex life. The eruptions lasted for roughly 1 million years. They pumped so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that global temperatures spiked, the oceans acidified, oxygen levels in the water plummeted. The ozone layer was shredded by volcanic gases. 96% of all marine species vanished. 70% of all land species gone. Paleontologists call this the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying. It was not a quick event. It was a slow suffocation of the biosphere across hundreds of thousands of years. The world that emerged on the other side was almost unrecognizable. Barren coastlines, acidic seas, a handful of survivor species clinging to existence in scattered refuges. But life does not stop. It adapts. Into this emptied world, the survivors began to diversify. One group, small and unimpressive, had been waiting in the margins. They were Archosaurs, reptiles with a slightly more efficient upright gait than their competitors. And in the recovery period after the Great Dying, they began to spread. Some of them evolved into crocodilians, some evolved into pterosaurs, the flying reptiles, and some evolved into the most iconic animals your planet has ever produced. The first true dinosaurs appeared around 243 million years ago. They were not the giants you picture. They were small. Some were barely the size of a house cat. But the world had been emptied for them. The competition had been wiped out. The stage had been cleared. Everything before the dinosaurs, every explosion of life, every extinction, every evolutionary experiment had been a prologue. The Cambrian creatures that built the first body plants, the plants that made breathing on land possible, the fish that crawled out of the water, the reptiles that freed life from the edge of the sea, the volcanic catastrophe that wiped the board clean. None of it was wasted. All of it led somewhere. Here is what that means for you. Your lungs work because a fish learned to breathe air. Your limbs exist because a creature pulled itself onto shore. Your skeleton is a modified version of a design that survived 5 mass extinctions. Every catastrophe in that 300 million year story was also a reset, a moment when the world cleared space for something that could not have existed before. You exist at the end of that chain, not despite the extinctions, because of them. Tonight, you looked up at the night sky and it seemed permanent, fixed, ancient. But the sky above the dinosaurs was different from the sky above you. And the sky above the creatures that ruled the world before the dinosaurs was different still. The only constant in the entire story is that life keeps finding a way forward. It always has. And so do you.